Brace yourself for a flavor explosion, food lovers. This is the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. This is Season 13, Episode 12. Today we crack open the culinary world of author Blanche Vaughan, a Michelin-starred chef who weaves magic with the simplest ingredients. Forget fancy gimmicks, Blanche is all about letting fresh flavors sing, and sing they do. In her pages from House and Garden, The Guardian, and her 5 delightful cookbooks, including the brand new House and Garden, A Year in the Kitchen. Are you ready to learn the secrets of everyday kitchen alchemy? Let's get cooking with Blanche Vaughan. I want to thank my listeners who are returning and being patient. We've had a bit of a hiatus because of issues in my life, but the podcast will be returning regularly in February, and I want to thank you for listening. On we go to my conversation with Blanche Vaughan. Welcome to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. Today, I am so very happy and honored to be talking with Blanche Vaughan, who is a food writer and chef who has a new cookbook out, A Year in the Kitchen, Seasonal Recipes for Everyday Pleasure. Blanche, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Dean, and it's lovely to be here.
Now, I just want to say, I want to hear about your journey from your childhood home to your current culinary haven. Could you share some insights into your upbringing and where you call home today?
Well, my upbringing was great in a food sense. I'm one of 5 children, and my mother is a fabulous cook. She's one of those old school cooks, you know. Her cookbooks were Elizabeth David, Jane Brigson, but she also had this sort of sense of modernity. So when we spent a lot of time in the countryside, where she grew vegetables. So I was very connected to seasonal food even as a child, and she'd take us foraging down the hedgerows, picking blackberries and sloes and damsons and all those sort of wonderful things. But when we came to London, which was quite frequently, she was really into knowing what was going on in the food world. Not that she worked in it at all, she worked in fashion, but she'd take us, even as quite young children, to restaurants to try things out, or she'd sort of, find out where good ingredients were sold. And so I feel like I had a really great grounding from home. And I've just taken that through life, really. So most importantly for me, good home food is the thing. I now spend a lot of time in Devon, which is a county in southwest England. It's partly coastal, but we live on the edge of wild Dartmoor, which is a wonderful place to live, and there are a lot of artisans and food producers. It's very much sort of animal country there. So it's, farmers have sheep, cattle. It's not so good for large scale agriculture, so arable farming. And there's a good food community, but it keeps me really rooted to the seasons. And I've got a veg garden there too. So things carry on, as my mother taught me.
Do you recall any particular cooking experiences from your childhood that sparked your passion for food and maybe left a mark on your culinary journey?
Absolutely. I think so much of my early experiences have informed what I do later, as I mentioned, the foraging and the eating out. I remember when your mum's a really good cook, you don't actually need to do that much cooking yourself. So I remember trying out little things in the kitchen between meal times. I had a Beatrix Potter cookbook, and I made lavender biscuits. So I went out into the garden and I picked lavender, and they're basically shortbread biscuits with crushed lavender in. But that at the time felt like it was quite exotic. And, we'd try little bits and pieces. It wasn't until I was about 16 and I was living at home, and the parents of some friends of mine very kindly took us for lunch at the River Café, and it blew my mind. I thought it was amazing. And my mum had the Blue River Café book at that time. And I remember that was the first recipe book that I seriously started trying to cook the recipes from. And I had a friend at school who really liked food as well. And on our way to school every morning, our conversation would always be, what did you have for dinner? And so it really sort of started from there.
At what point in your life did you think, I want to be a food writer, I want to be a chef? How did those paths come for you?
Well, it was slightly controversial because at the school that I went to for my last 2 years, which are the A-level years, was a really quite an academic school, and everybody left there and went on to university. But I just knew that I wanted to carry on working, or not carry on because I'd never done it before, but I wanted to pursue a career in food in some way. And I just didn't quite know how I was going to do that. But once you've got the fire inside you, you just sort of make your own path, don't you? So off I went, and I went and took myself to live in Italy for a few years, because for me that was like the holy grail of
Oh,
food.
wow.
And I learned to cook. I learned to cook. I learned to speak Italian. I learned to cook just, from going to the markets and finding beautiful things to cook with and eating in restaurants and seeing how they did it and trying to recreate those things. And it really led on from there. And when I found myself back in England, I did a couple of shifts at a restaurant which was owned and run by a fabulous English chef called Alistair Little, and it was in Soho. And I went and did a couple of shifts there, and I learned two things. I learned how much I love restaurants, and I learned that I really needed to learn a lot more before I worked in them. So I went and did a year's cooking course at a culinary institute called Leith's. And from there, I set off on my first job at Morrow.
So bringing that up, I wanted to talk about that a little bit because you've worked at some amazing establishments. You've worked at world-renowned places like Morrow, the River Café, which we mentioned, and St. John, which I'm particularly interested in. Can you talk about these experiences and how they kind of changed your life?
Absolutely. And they really did change my life. Firstly, I was very, very lucky, because whether it was my own intuition or just sheer luck, I ended up in kitchens that were really nurturing, and they spent a lot of time teaching the young chefs and the new chefs how to cook in their specific way. Both Morrow and the River Café. So I started at Morrow and then went and where I worked for a few years, and then went on to the River Café, and they were run in a very similar way. Because the chef owners of Morrow had met and trained at the River Café, so they were kind of replicating a lot of the systems. And that system was not the traditional restaurant hierarchy system. It was based on meritocracy. So everybody, whatever their experience, would turn up and work on the cold section. And then as you got better, you'd move up through the sections, but still, even if you were the head chef, you might sometimes do some shifts on the cold section. So it wasn't the traditional arrangement where you only apply for a job on one section and you continue to work on that section. So it gave me a really broad range of experience. I learned to do loads of things. At Morrow, what was amazing at Morrow was we cooked on natural heat. So we had a barbecue grill which we lit
Oh,
every
wow.
morning and added coals to as we were cooking, and we had a wood-fired oven, and we also had a gas ring and an oven, and all a gas oven. But those were like secondary heat sources. So there was this incredible thing of not just learning how to cook, but learning how to manage heat. And the River Cafe, as you probably know, is their focus on the quality of ingredients was second to none. And it was just so fascinating to really understand what quality ingredients do to food. And as Ruthie Rogers always said, less is more. And she was absolutely right. That was their philosophy. And then St. John, which was a completely different experience, and they adhered more to the traditional kitchen setup. The dessert section was actually in another kitchen in the downstairs space of the restaurant. But again, it was, there were a lot. It was much more male kitchen, and we had to be
Yeah.
strong and tough and haul things around. But they really took so much care in teaching me and and looking after all the staff. It was a it was a great environment, and as a result, I learned a huge amount during my 7 or 8 years that I was cooking there. I also did, and this sort of gives you a sense of how sort of supportive and interested they were in the chefs. Between working at the River Café in St. John, I decided to take the summer off. And Rose Gray, who was then at the River Café, who's sadly not with us any longer, she said, "Look, you've got to go and work at Chez Panisse." So she called up Alice Waters,
Oh,
and
wow.
she arranged for me to go and spend the summer there, which was, as you can imagine, another incredible experience. So yeah, I felt like we weren't just employed chefs. We were really part of the family.
I didn't know you had spent time at Chez Penny, and that's wonderful to find out. How did you like Berkeley?
I loved Berkeley. I absolutely love Berkeley. I love the size of it.
Yeah.
It's after London. It's like a little village.
Yeah.
I also loved what it was, the gateway to. It was
Yeah.
so fun doing trips on days off up into Sonoma and
Hmm.
the wine country and the countryside, the lakes, that wonderful Bass Lake went swimming in. I love going to the farmers markets, and because I was technically I was employed, but it was a very informal arrangement because I didn't have an American visa and it was only going to be for a short time. I was sent off to meet the farmers and have conversations with the people that were producing the food. And this, of course, sort of resonated with my childhood because where I spent a lot of time growing up in Herefordshire, we were surrounded by farmers, and that
Yeah.
production of food, that connection with it, was very much part of my life, always had been. So it was nice to be reminded of that again.
I'd like to talk about some of your writing. In 2011, you were one of the contributing authors to the Great British Food Revival book. Can you tell us about the significance of this project and the impact that it had on you?
It really was a significant project because it was what it was like my first gig in writing, or my first published gig. I'd I'd had to stop cooking at St. John after a couple of years because I'd had a really bad back injury. And physically, I wasn't able to sustain that kind of level of work in the kitchen. So I'd I'd started doing some writing for the Guardian online, writing about an allotment blog. So the stuff that I was picking, growing, cooking, and it was a really great thing to do. And it was because of that the publishers who were producing the Great British Food Revival got in touch with me and said, "We would really like you to contribute." I think it was the majority of recipes actually to the book, and of course, it was just so up my street. It was British seasonal ingredients, so it was a real marker in many ways, and also a lovely way into the world of book publishing.
You collaborated next with Julian Metcalf on Itsu, the cookbook. This was in 2014. As a testament to your culinary prowess. What made this particular partnership so fruitful, and what aspects of the cookbook resonated with you the most?
So it's kind of interesting in England. I don't know if it's the same with you, but we tend to get quite pigeonholed in our careers.
Yeah.
And although I was obviously always working in food, I began to be pigeonholed into a specific type of food. So
Yeah.
this was a really interesting opportunity to show that I didn't just know how to do European food. Julian was a fabulous person to work with, and he really gave me totally free rein creatively. And it came at a really good time because I'd recently traveled to Japan and Shanghai, not least to sort of get a bit of experience about their culinary culture, but it wasn't something that I was planning to write a book about. So this opportunity came along at a wonderful time, and it really allowed me to look at Japanese specifically and Asian cooking, but through the eyes of the normal consumer. So the person walking down the street that wants to nip in and grab something quick to eat and doesn't want to go to some sort of kaiseki restaurant in Tokyo that they've flown across the world to do, and it's got like 12 courses. So it was a really fun way to fiddle around with those ingredients and make stuff that actually people were going to make at home. And I really enjoyed doing it, and I learned a lot from it, and I now have an enduring love of that food culture, but I also make a lot of it at home. I've just been given a book about a Japanese Californian restaurant in San Francisco that's opened by a guy who cooked at Chez Panisse for about 6 years. I've forgotten the name of it, but it might ring a bell.
Oh, I'm running out blank. I'm sorry.
Let me tell you what it's called, because it was really Rintaro.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so a book like that normally would have seemed impenetrable, but now that I've done this work and I did this work with Julian, I feel like I can dive into that and really just have a go.
As somebody who has a passion for healthy eating, I'm intrigued by your perspective on superfoods, which you talked about. What recommendations would you offer to those who struggle to incorporate these nutrient-rich ingredients into their weekly cooking?
I love that question, because I think there's something about superfoods that is staring us right in the face and we choose to ignore. Okay, so a lot of people, when they think superfood, they think they've got to go and buy a specialist product from a health food shop or even a pharmacy. But I think that really the stuff that we need to get is all okay. I do soak some chia seeds and have them for breakfast. I will admit that. But I think all those nutrients that we need, we get from really well produced fruit and vegetables. And when I mean well produced, I mean produced with no chemical intervention, seasonal, freshly harvested, so that they're retaining a lot of their goodness. I wrote a column for House and Garden over the past the year before last. I did a whole year of it talking about seasonal ingredients, and I enjoyed obviously talking about how we cook with them, but I also allowed myself to go into a bit more research into what they provided for us nutritionally. And I love that there are, if you choose to eat purple things like beetroots, purple cabbage, anything basically with a naturally purple color, your pomegranates, for example, they're full of anthocyanins, which are some of the best antioxidants. And it's kind of fun just sort of learning what nature can provide for us in terms of superfoods.
I want to talk about your time as food editor of House and Garden, and how has this created a change in your life? How has it changed your perspective on food and cooking?
It's a really great role to have, and one of the most fun things about it is I get to ask some of my favorite cooks and chefs to write the recipes for me that I want to cook at home. But actually, joking aside, it's really allowed me to take a broader perspective on what it is that people actually really want to eat and how they really want to cook, because there's a lot of food writing out there which is obviously really good, but often a bit hard for people to incorporate into their home cooking routines. And I like to really feel that what I'm commissioning or what I'm writing are things that are going to get into people's kitchens, and they're going to be able to really enjoy them. They're not just looking at them from afar. So it's been really fun to do that. It's also a great way to stay so plugged into the food world. I hear about all the new restaurant openings, all the new products, all the new cookbooks. It's a fabulous job, and I've really enjoyed doing it.
Your newest book is the impressive A Year in the Kitchen. This book's a delightful celebration of seasonal flavors. What inspired you to start this book, and can you tell us about the unique perspectives that this book provides?
So, having written recipes for House and Garden for the past, almost 8 years, I realized that actually people are, they're looking at these recipes on the page, they're beautifully photographed, they're beautifully styled, but this is a magazine about people's homes and people's gardens, and I wanted to literally take that from 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional. So I wanted to create this book where people could feel like they were actually walking into that home and laying the table and putting the flowers on it and making the food and getting their friends around, and kind of really inspire them to see that happen and see the sort of fruition of that. And so I used my own story to illustrate it, I suppose. So it's quite a personal book in the sense that I talk about why I chose these recipes, why I like to eat things at that time of year. And I'm hoping that, these are things that a lot of people are going to feel resonate with them too. And the idea that food, cooking something doesn't have to be a big deal. It can be just a simple thing, but you can elevate that experience by, maybe putting some nice things on the table, a candle or some glasses or a little bunch of flowers. And even if it's a bowl of soup and it's just two of you, you then get the sense that it's a little bit of a ritual, and the whole thing is just, it's a lovely moment to have in your day. So I hope that the book will just sort of take people into the home and help them to really experience that and enjoy that side of life.
I loved reading the book. I got a chance to get an advanced copy of it, and I loved just sitting down with a cup of tea and just reading it cover to cover, because it's one of those books where, while it is a cookbook, of course, it's got gorgeous photographs and it's got your wonderful writing. Was that kind of your intent when you're going into it? Because it really has from the cover, which is gorgeous, to the interior photographs, it has this kind of very homey feeling. Was that the intent?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that that's what came through to you, because in the end, home is where we cook, right? Unless you're cooking in a restaurant. And I think because I did it with House and Garden magazine, we've also got the opportunity to show how all these different homes can be laid out, or the choices that people make to make their home feel like a home. So it was very nice to be able to illustrate it in that way. And we've also got so many fabulous food photographers whose work is in the book. And so I feel like there's different kind of perspectives and angles on things, yet the whole thing feels very cohesive when it's all brought together in that way.
As I said earlier, it's visually stunning. Well, how did you feel when you first saw the finished product, when you got your galley proof of that? How must that have felt for you?
You know, that's my hardest bit, is when I first see it, because you put so much work in and suddenly it's there. You know, it's like someone sort of presenting you with the newborn screaming baby that's sort of
Yeah.
covered in stuff, and you know, it feels a bit like that. However, I I really love it, and all the decisions that we wavered over, I feel like we made the right choice on. I'm so happy with the cover, and it, particularly that it's vegetables and not a photograph, because I think the book has contained so many beautiful photographs. We couldn't have chosen the best one for the cover. And I also really like that it's not just photograph. There are illustrations too. And I feel that kind of gives it that organic sense, which is a very important thing to come through in the cookbook, because ultimately, you know, these are tactile ingredients that we're going to be working with in the end. And it's been such a great book to work on. I've really enjoyed that sense of collaboration, both with the house and garden team who helped me gather everything together, and the support. But, you know, it's hard work doing a book, and deadlines are not your friend.
I'm glad you mentioned the look of the book too, because I mean, I really love the cover. It has a beautiful kind of a nice, I want to say, pink kind of edge on the binding, and then it's got these lovely pictures of like, I think it's chard and different greens
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
cover, but it's
Cavolo,
art.
rainbow
Yeah.
chard, and curly kale. Yeah.
And it's beautiful because, I mean, as somebody who's a librarian, I see all these books that are mass produced, they're just churned out, and they usually just have a photo of the author on the cover and the title, blah, blah, blah. And this looked like it had actually was curated. It had some attention paid to it. And it's beautiful because it's almost like a work of art. It's something you could have in your kitchen, and it kind of invites the eye. Don't you think? Like, it just makes you look, it kind of draws your attention to it a little bit.
I completely agree. And the fact that those illustrations on the front are slightly embossed, so it
Yeah.
gives them a really 3D quality, which I love. The photos inside are great, and also I was so lucky with this one because it went through two art directors. It had the eyes of our house and garden art director, who's fabulous, and it had the eyes of the publishing house art director. So not one page was unconsidered. So it's been a real labor of love. But as I say, it's been a wonderful collaboration with all those talents, and I felt that it's a lovely place for my recipes to be able to sit now.
Now, I mean, I can't speak enough about it because I'm a former bookseller and now I'm a librarian. And as somebody who gets to work with books a lot, it's nice to see something that's singular that really seems to be curated and made with love. And I really feel like this was a work of love.
Well, that's really lovely to hear. Thank you.
Blanche, I want to ask you, looking towards the future, what kind of exciting projects are you working on now?
Well, it's always good looking towards the future, and there's I've got a few things that I'm really interested in. Obviously, more growing, more gardening. The publicity tour for the book has been really fun because I've met quite a lot of people who not just food people, but people who work in gardens and decorating as well. And I'm already sort of talking to people about doing some collaborations with them. There's, you know, that to me the growing world is not just fruit and veg. And
Right.
although I'll continue to write the recipes, it's lovely to just sort of really think beyond, you know. So when I'm thinking of like the color palette of how a recipe looks when it's completed, then, you know, maybe I'll think about the color palette of the flowers that I'm putting on the table too. And always I'm just thinking about what it is that people really want to eat. So whether it's incorporating some new food trend, or whether it's focusing on how we're producing some particular ingredient in this country, I think, I'll always stick to my roots of really good, simple food, but everything can always be sort of, thought about further and re-examined. So I think there's a lot of work ahead of me, and I'm looking forward to it.
Blanche, I want to thank you for being on the podcast. I've really enjoyed getting a chance to talk to you. I want to encourage our listeners to go out and get a copy of Year in the Kitchen. You'll love it yourself, and also it makes a wonderful gift for the holidays. We have links to that in the bio. Blanche, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I've really had a lovely conversation with you.
Thank you too. It's been great fun chatting to you.
That was my conversation with author Blanche Vaughan. We were talking about her new book, A Year in the Kitchen, that is available now through all major retailers, and we have links to it in the bio. We'll be returning to our regularly scheduled podcast with weekly episodes starting in February. I want to thank my listeners for staying with me during this time of hardship. I've been kind of working out some issues, so I haven't been recording as much, but I will be returning soon in February to weekly episodes. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you all, and Happy New Year.